In this video, we're going to look at wall surfaces because this is really where we start to detail space. When we think about surface materials, we can think of it in two ways. The materials are either structural or applied. On the right image, we see a brick wall. That brick is not only something we see and adds character to the room, but it's also how the wall is built. It is the structure of the wall. On the left, we're seeing a very ornate, elaborate room, but all those plaster details are purely applied to the surface. They're not structural, they're not critical to the wall standing or holding up the ceiling, just applied to the surface. So when we think about surface details, these can mean many things and take many different forms and have a true effect on the space. One of the most basic and simple ways to start finishing a space and completing the wall in the room is by painting the drywall. So the most common type of paint is latex paint. It's probably the type that you yourself have used. Latex paint is fast drying and water-based, and it's basically made of pigment, latex binder, and water. It's easy to use and it's user-friendly because it's cleanable with water. Since it's water-based, you don't need any other chemicals to clean up when you're done. Latex paint does have VOCs, volatile organic compounds. So that means that as you're using this and it's drying, it does off-gas and release chemicals. And so that's really what's giving it that paint smell. There are low VOC paints and other options, but it is a concern and something that needs to be considered. We also have oil-based paint. Oil-based paint is also very common, and you also may have used this as well. It's slower drying than latex paint, and it's basically made up of pigments that are all ground up and suspended in oil. They have a much higher VOC content, so the chemical smell from an oil-based paint is much stronger, much more noticeable, and so you really need to be in a ventilated area. Oil-based paint will yellow over time, more so than a latex paint ever would, but they are really much more durable. They bond very well to a variety of surfaces. They are very smooth and kind of level themselves a little bit. So they have a really wonderful finish. But again, they take longer to dry. They do have more VOCs, and then the cleanup is more challenging because it's not water-based. You can't just clean it up with soap and water. You have to use mineral spirits or turpentine to actually clean up, for oil-based paint. We can also have lacquer finishes. Lacquer finishes can either be clear or a colored varnish that dries into a hard, durable finish. And these can take many forms, but can be very, very durable and very beautiful. When we think of sheens, in particular with paint, we can think of flat, eggshell, satin, semi-gloss, and gloss. Those are the most common. This can also be for polyurethanes and shellacs and things like that as well. So flat is the most matte finish, and then they get progressively shinier as we move along into refinedly at gloss. A flat finish paint is really best for situations like living rooms, bedrooms, great on ceilings. Flat finishes hide imperfections really well because they sort of diffuse the surface, but they're not very durable. So dirt sticks to flat paint and it's harder to clean, just because it kind of holds on to dirt, and it's not strong to scrubbing. We also have eggshell finish. It's a step up, so it has a little bit of a sheen to it, and it can be really good for kitchens, foyers, trim work, things like that. It still hides imperfections fairly well. It's not super shiny. It has that sheen of an eggshell, but it's a little bit more durable, a little bit easier to clean. We have a satin finish. Satin finish is in the middle. And it can be really good for, areas that need a little bit more durability. Children's bedrooms or playrooms, laundry rooms, mud rooms, areas like that where it needs to stand up to a little bit more wear and tear and a little more cleaning. Then next we have semi-gloss. Semi-gloss is quite shiny, noticeably more shiny than satin. It's great for doors, trim, molding, cabinets. It's very durable and you can really scrub it easily and get off dirt and grime. And then last we have a gloss finish. So a high gloss finish is really good for doors, trim, woodwork, things like that. Things that need to stand up to the wear and tear. And you also have to like that look. It needs to be appropriate for your application. It can be very beautiful. The kind of tricky part of a gloss finish is that yes, it's very durable, and yes, it's easier to clean and wipe off because it releases off that shiny surface. However, it will show all of the imperfections, any bumps or scrapes or dings, and it will show things like fingerprints and that type of thing very quickly. So it's sort of a trade-off with a gloss finish. On our walls, we can also have things like paneling. It doesn't just have to be a painted type of surface. And paneling can be in sheets, tiles, or even board and batten panels. So this image here is a mid-century 1950s house with the original flat slab mahogany wall. And so this is, another way we can approach finishing our walls. It could, be big sheets of wood, for example. We can also have paneling that's in more of a tile system, so they're modular, you can fit them together. And these can be made out of a variety of materials. And these show a more contemporary, modern type of a look that can cover, an entire wall if you'd like it to. We can also have board and batten panels. So this is where we get into things like wainscoting and that type of a look, which we'll be talking about more. And these can be, low, cover the entire wall, or anywhere in between. But paneling in that board and batten fashion is a great look and can really finish off a space. When we think about walls, we commonly think about drywall, and that's, what's the most common in construction right now, especially for residential interiors. But we can also be thinking about lath and plaster. Lath and plaster is much more common in older buildings before drywall came around. And so we have our studs, as you can see in the image on the right, and those are running vertically. And then we have lath, those thin strips that are attached horizontally across those studs, and that lath gives the plaster something to adhere to. So when the plaster is kind of pushed around and kind of squished on that lath, it oozes in between those boards, and then as it dries, that actually allows it to hang on. It gives it a really great finish, but it clearly requires a lot of skill and patience and time to work with lath and plaster. The finished look can be quite lovely and have a lot of different appearances, and it has a different quality both in terms of touch and acoustics than drywall does, and again is often found in older homes or very high-end homes as well. Wall coverings are very common and used in a wide variety of applications. And so when we think of wall coverings, we tend to say wallpaper, but wall coverings is a bigger category than that. When we think of wall coverings, we're really thinking of a printed surface that's adhered to a backing and then applied to the wall. And, wall coverings can be both decorative but also hide imperfections and even protect the wall surface. If we think about the patterns of wall coverings, they vary dramatically. And of course, the more contrasting the colors and patterns, the more dynamic the design might be. And if we vary the color combinations, which of course is very common with patterns, this can really alter the mood and perceived size of the space. So dramatic, large-scale patterns have a very different effect than kind of monochrome, small patterns on a space, for example. When we think about texture of wall covering, it can be visual actual texture or both. So the texture could just be visual in that it's printed on the vinyl or the paper or whatever it might be. But the actual touch, the hand of it, is very smooth. We can also have textured paper wall covering that is physical. You can touch it and feel the relief. And we can have both, where we have a printed image on top of a physically textured surface. As I said, there are many types of wall covering, and just to name a few, would be cork, for example. So actual cork that's very, very thin and applied to a backing, and it has a very soft, natural quality to it. We also have vinyl, so we can have residential grade vinyl and commercial grade vinyl, which is thicker and tougher, and especially in commercial situations, whether it's hospitality, hotels, restaurants, hospitals, clinics, that vinyl can be very thick and very, very durable. So not only it lends an aesthetic appeal, but it protects the wall from damage as well. We can also have handmade paper, which can be quite pricey but quite beautiful. We can have things like bamboo, natural weaves and grasses, and all kinds of different options that have very dramatic effects on our perception of a space and the final design feel. When we think about the patterns of wall coverings, there's a few basics to keep in mind, and one of the most common patterns is a straight match. The straight match is really where the pattern has to line up so that the design elements on one vertical strip as it's applied are equally spaced and directly lined up with the next pattern. So the installer has to be very thoughtful and conscientious about lining up that pattern. We can also have a drop repeat where, again, the installer has to be paying very close attention so that as they line up the pattern, the next vertical stripe that they apply, the pattern is at that halfway point down. Okay, so there's a shift. We can also have random patterns where, as the wall covering's installed, there isn't a matching concern. We just want it to be neat and straight. But, for example, a vertical stripe is going to automatically line up no matter what. So then there's not a matching problem. So really with wall coverings, the possibilities are truly endless. There are so many varieties in terms of shape and color and scale that, if you can imagine it, you might be able to find it. So, we're seeing very geometric shapes. We're seeing very large scale, super colorful, organic shapes. We can, mimic real life scenes. We can have a very natural look. The pattern can be the entire, sheet of the wall covering or just a small part. We can have, very large scale, super colorful floral patterns. We can have very simple artistic things like this kind of watercolor splotch that's a very, very, very large repeat. We could have something that's a much smaller repeat and even be kind of peculiar. We have our clocks and pizzas, making up this pattern, for example. We can have murals that are precisely fit to the exact size of your wall. So it's really just a large image than a pattern. And we can have all kinds of, historical, retro, vintage inspired patterns, things like that. So it'd be a personal favorite. But again, the patterns are really endless. And so as we think of our walls, think big.